Blessings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Revolution of Love. This is our Sunday night service. This is the second service of the year. We have blessings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to. You got to hear me almost in stereo there. That was because they were live streaming on Facebook already. So again, welcome. This is the second service of the year, and we do have a new format. This is the Sunday Agitation service. So just know this, that the second service, the second Sunday is always Healing Sunday, and then the fourth Sunday is Agitation Sunday. So we're in for a really special treat. We have a guest speaker tonight, and that is Tahil Sharma. I will be telling you some more about him, and then you'll get to hear from him in just a little bit. But before we go any further, let us consecrate this time and this space with lighting a candle, and then I'm going to pray in the way that I pray, recognizing that this is a multi-path space and that some of you may pray very differently. So let's do it, okay? Let's begin. If you have a candle, I invite you to light it right now. Okay. And then, as we always do here at Roll, we like to take the 3 deep breaths. And so we will breathe in through the nostrils, and then let's hold for a moment, and then we can exhale. So if you are able to feel your feet on the ground, please do. And if it is comfortable to close your eyes, please do. And then let us breathe together, friends. Breathing in. And exhaling. Connecting with your body. Connecting with this time, and we take another breath in, breathing in through the nose. And then the exhale. Good. And a third breath, breathing in. And now the exhale. And so, Holy One, one with many names, we come before you in a time such as this, in a time where there is war and rumors of wars. We beseech you. We say, please help us see the way. Please help us set our minds right and clear, and help us to disconnect from any of the things, any of the ills that have gotten us here, and truly be healed. A special blessing upon this time and this night, a blessing upon Tahil as he will be sharing with us and speaking to us. May we be open, may we be present to what is to come through him, and may we be that much more aware of the ways that we can engage. May we be agitated into creating change, Spirit. May we recognize that this is our birthright, to not just simply be, but to, in fact, do. In times such as these, we do come before you and we do beseech you. And we bring our hearts, no matter how broken, no matter our minds, no matter how confused, our bodies, no matter how afflicted or chaotic, we come before you. We come before you in the beauty and the wonder and the curiosity that is holy. We come before you and we bring you rage, and we bring you, yes, love. We know that we are blanketed and we are encompassed in grace by you, and we will not forget it. We will not forget it. And so let us take refuge right now, tonight, in this sacred canopy, just one of many iterations of revolution of love. We know that there are so many spiritual centers and religious places and organizations that are doing this incredible work of justice and that we are joining in that spirit right now. Amen to this. Let us never forget that. And that is a hope that we cling to, and it is a belief that we are steadfast in. And recognizing the people that have shuffled off recently, recognizing the ancestors that are on the other side of the veil, and holding our loved ones here very close. We do beseech you, and we love you. And we say, and the people said, Amen. Amen. Nashe and Aho. Aho. So right now we are going to have a couple of volunteers. Manny will be sharing the screen, and we will have the land acknowledgement as well as our path acknowledgement. And so if someone could come off of mute and volunteer to read that as soon as Manny puts it up, that would be wonderful. One volunteer, please, for the land acknowledgement. We'll just wait. Okay, perfect.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
At this time, we want to take a moment to reflect on the lands on which we reside. We are coming from many places and acknowledge the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of Indigenous people who have been here since time immemorial, and to recognize that they are still here fighting for human rights, for lands and their culture. I am in central Indiana, and I acknowledge the stolen lands of the Potawatomi and the Chippewa. Please acknowledge the lands which you reside upon in the chat. If you don't know where to go to native-land.ca.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robert Gross in the house. And now, who would like to read our path acknowledgement? Please just come off mute and bless us.
I can do this one.
Thank you.
Path acknowledgement. We acknowledge the paths and beliefs represented here. We honor all religions, philosophies, ideologies, belief systems, healing modalities, and spiritual perspectives. We honor the life experience and wisdom you have brought here today. We respect you and welcome you into this brave space. And we emphatically state that disrespect, prejudice, discrimination of any kind has no place here. We empower one another through respect and strength to be true revolutionaries of love and justice. We see you, we hear you, we love you.
Yes, yes, we do. Wonderful. And now Manny is going to read our newly revamped mission and vision.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Robert Gross and Margaret as well for reading those. By the way, my name is Manny Figueroa. I reside in the stolen lands of the Southern Paiute and Shoshone tribes. And my pronouns are he and him. And yeah, here we go with the mission statement. It is to create, and the vision statement for the Revolution of Love Ministry Movement: bring hope, inspiration, education, and action to every change agent in the world. If you are breathing, you are a change agent. No matter who you are, what you look like, where you come from, who you love. We welcome you. We love you. The time is now. This is the revolution. Thank you for listening.
Did I freeze there? Sorry.
We lost
Sorry,
you.
folks. I am in Henderson, Nevada, and acknowledging the stolen lands of the Chemehuevi and the Southern Paiute, and acknowledging also that the internet is vermis. It's not wonderful here. So, Manny, did we do our "we see you, we hear you, we love you"? Our time is now as well.
No.
Let's do that. Would you lead us in the blessing, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll do it 3 times. And we'll say, we see you, we hear you, and we love you. So starting with the first one. And if you could come off mute, if you feel comfortable to do so, we implore you. Also, all together now. We see you.
See you.
See you.
We hear you.
Hear you.
We love
We
you.
love you.
We see you.
See you.
We hear you.
We hear you.
We love you.
We love you.
We see you.
We see you.
We hear you.
We hear you.
We love
We
you.
love you.
Thank you.
There it is. Thank you so much. Nice to do it again. It seems like it's been a while since we've had our blessing, doesn't it? A little while there. So here we are, everyone. This is the formal welcome right now. If you're just tuning in, everybody say hello to our friends and family on Facebook Live. My name is Reverend Felicia Perez-Zader. I'm delighted that we are here. This is a really challenging time, obviously, for the obvious reasons with everything that is happening in Ukraine and to the Ukrainian people. And so Revolution of Love does condemn the violence and the attack on the Ukraine, and we continue to educate ourselves as to how we got here. This bullshit stops happening. So we continue to dismantle any system of violence and oppression. I remember one time I was at an action with Tahil Sharma, who will be speaking tonight, and he said, we need to cut the crap. I don't know if you remember this, Tahil. It was outside a Geo Group in Century City, an action for immigrant rights. And he said very poignantly, and Tahil's an extremely incredible speaker, but when he said we need to cut the crap, I can't echo it more for right now. We need to cut the crap. Any ways that we invest in war mentality and all of this kind of thinking, whether it's white supremacy or capitalism, you name it, all of these structures that are a degradation to our souls, we must commit to stopping it now. Stopping it now. Yes? Let's see it. Let's see it. Yes. I know most of you already believe this way and think this way. So Agitation Sunday right here is about not only ourselves maybe being agitated, but how do we get out there and agitate the folks that we meet? How do we organize? How do we mobilize? So yes, here we are. Grateful to be breathing in and out together, and let us move forward with this evening. This ministry, for those of you that may not know, it's been going since 2012. It started in Berkeley with live services, then we moved to Los Angeles, and then of course the pandemic, we moved to Zoom. And so we've been pretty much meeting very consistently on the Zoom. And I already told you a little bit about our new format. So I want to make sure that Tahil has enough time to speak tonight, and then also for Q&A, any questions you may have for him. As I was just saying, so I'm going to breathe. Let's take a breath together. So as I just mentioned, I have been in different actions with Tahil, everything mostly surrounding immigrant rights. And we also have sat on a board together, done interfaith work together. I am honored to be colleagues with him. I am honored to call him friend as well. He is a force. And so I'm telling you right now to prepare yourself So let's sink deeply into the words that he will be sharing with us tonight. And I would also like to read you a little bit about the work that he does in the world. He is the regional coordinator for North America at the United Religions Initiative, URI. It's the world's largest grassroots network and movement for interfaith cooperation. Tahil has been working on efforts for pluralism and justice for 10 years, focusing on the intersection of faith, politics, and justice, sharing his perspective from the Hindu and Sikh traditions. Tahil serves as a board member of Sadhana, a coalition of progressive Hindus, as an interfaith minister in residence for the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. This is a real treat. And Tahil, your Revolution of Love family welcomes you right now. Take it away.
Thank you, dear sister. It's been a very long time since we've been able to see each other's faces and offer warm embraces and probably a couple of laughs. So I'm very, very thankful that we could share some digital space today at the very least. And to bring in a bit of a comedic spin to what I might, share today, which will get pretty serious at some points. Let's lower the expectations by like 20 or 30%, so that just in case I'm a bit underwhelming, at least it'll still seem like a healthy amount. So I'd appreciate that. The buildup was a bit intense there, and I don't want to disappoint anyone. So let's lower the expectations a little bit. But good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure and honor to share this space with you all this evening. After what we would consider another week in this reality we called life. We are bearing witness once again to, at least in my generation, another routine of war that seems to be never ending, never ceasing. And we find ourselves in a space of treating war almost as if we treat our religious institutions, with such an emphasis on the tradition of what they bring into many of our spaces today. Tradition is usually seen as something very significant for us. Tradition is daily routine for many of us. It's where we find ourselves waking up in the morning to routines that make us feel like there's purpose. It is taking us through the day and guiding us in our decisions. And it brings us a reminder in the evenings that there is another day to act for the repairing of the world. But in many cases, those same traditions, unfortunately, are built on unjust ideas, systems, and ultimately the oppression of many people. And I know this coming from the tradition of Hinduism that I come from personally. For many of you who may know about Hinduism, Hinduism is not just a single idea. It is not a single belief. It is not a single practice. It is an amalgamation of thousands of years of perspectives and schools of thought and deities and traditions galore. It is the one of the most significant ways of having a sensory overload when it comes to engaging in religiosity, as I would like to argue, because of the sounds and the smells and the ways that you can immerse yourself in a very spiritual and deeply loving environment. But what happens when you challenge these traditions? What happens when you begin to question some of their origins? This is where I began a journey on deeply understanding my force as a Hindu personally, but also my idea of what it means to actually live into what this talk is about today, the tradition of reform. So as a kid, I remember going to the Hindu temple very often. I had very, very keen curiosity about religious practices because they appealed to me in a different way. Since I was 5, I remember going to various temples and religious communities to go worship with people and see how they pray and observe the ways that they engaged with the divine. My relatives had taught me prayers from a young age when I was not even fluent in the languages of Hindi and Sanskrit. But I was taught to be in this process of memorization to do what we call arti, which is where we light candles and mud lamps and incense, and we begin to worship these altars filled with the many gods and goddesses that are very recognizable in Hinduism. And over time, I noted, the nature of me enjoying the sensory experience personally. It gave me a very unique way to be connected to the divine, not just in my thoughts, but literally in every single way that I can engage. But I then began to think about something as I grew older, because as I entered the space of tradition, I was also, I had a strange bedfellow, which I would like to call the caste system, that kind of stared me in the face from a young age, but I never understood what it really was. My grandmother, when she took me for a haircut one day, once said that you should be proud to be a Brahmin, which is considered the highest caste within the system. And I said, that's interesting. Okay, what does that mean? I have no idea what you're talking about because I was born in the United States. My understanding of my religion is very limited to going to the temple, praying at home, and that's it. What is this Brahmin thing that you speak of? And she said, oh, this is your caste. This is a legacy that you are a part of. And I said, okay, but why should I be proud of it? And she did not answer the question and took me for my haircut. That question always loomed around me growing up in a lot of Hindu spaces, both in India and in the US. I never understood what this system was. I never was meant to understand, the power that it had in being able to actually control society. And that was my privilege speaking, because I was born into the highest caste. I could have the ignorance necessary to not be faced with any implications or consequences. But then I began to notice something as I got older about the nature of how these traditions could actually engage in exclusivist practices of something that I thought was open to everyone. In going to some temples in India, I remember this very clearly in 2016. I was in the city of Jaipur when I was exploring with a couple of my friends this giant old fort that existed for some of the empires back in several centuries ago. And there was a small Hindu temple that stood right outside of this fort. It was a grand structure. And there was this very tiny temple. You could barely fit 2 or 3 people inside. And I went because I was super excited that I saw a temple that I just immediately began to run towards it. I promise you, most Hindus are not like that. I think I'm a little special that way. But I got to the temple, I immediately removed my shoes off and I started to pray. And the priest came out of the temple and he said, hello, what is your name? And I said, my name is Tahil. You're asking my name, I'm going to give it to you. And he said, no, what is your last name? And I said, my last name is Sharma. And he said, oh my goodness, you are from one of the highest castes. We would never expect you to enter this temple space. And I became extremely confused. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, this temple is actually for lower caste people because there are other temples where they are not allowed into the space. And that struck me as immediately shocking. I had never heard something like that said so vividly to me in a way that made me get caught completely off guard. When you hear the idea that people are not allowed in a sacred space because of their caste, because of their color, because of their creed, you begin to deeply question this idea of what is the foundation of these traditions and why do they exist? It is that point when I began to discover that something was off about my understanding of Hinduism, in that it was very narrow to the realities of how it actually gave birth to an unjust system. And I'm speaking to you all today after years of deconstructing this personally to say that I am an anti-caste Hindu. I am a Hindu who says that the caste system not only does not speak for me as a Hindu, but actually dishonors the very idea that Hinduism should exist based on the system, which is unfortunately an inseparable reality that has now existed. Now, if there were other Hindus on the call, I might have caused a ruckus just now and I might not be able to continue this call. But That is not that space today, and I don't have time for that crap, like I've said before to Felicia about other matters. Because the fact of the matter is that the caste system, in the way that it has functioned as a tradition within Hindu households, has impacted not only the way that we have an understanding of unjust systems within faith spaces, but that currently South Asia, particularly India, has created a system that has created inequity in society at large. When you do not have access to jobs, to education, to funds, to loans, to travel to foreign spaces without the same implications of what is your last name and what is your caste, that tells you how toxic a system has become and how toxic a system that can become to actually affect how a faith tradition is practiced. Because now, in a reality where there is the small percentage of people who are from the most privileged caste that get to dictate the decisions of an entire nation or an entire faith community, they are also the ones that can say and be as dismissive of, oh, privilege does not exist, oh, discrimination does not exist, oh, hate does not exist against people from other minorities, and they get to dictate the narrative. That narrative may sound very familiar to some of you, because it does parallel the realities of the racist systems that have existed for centuries on American soil. And that is why many folks from Dalit and Adivasi communities, those who come from lower castes and indigenous communities within South Asia, stand in solidarity many times with movements like Black Lives Matter. It is because there is a nature of shared trauma and suffering that is very necessary for them to find solidarity across cultures, across faiths, and across geographical contexts. So what do I do as someone who, in an American context, never, having not lived in India all of my life, have to do about this? There are a couple of routes I can go down at the end of the day. And the route that I chose is the one less traveled. It's the one of deconstructing my own faith and understanding the role that it has to play in pursuing justice and peace for what it actually is, rather than using it as terms of endearment and terms that make us seem more accepting so that we can fit into other spaces, which is often what happens with a lot of communities that boast this idea that they have Hindus among them, when in reality, those Hindu communities may be harboring some very problematic perspectives. Now, this is not to say that all Hindus may be following the caste system to the T, because I'm very thankful to say that I am not the only anti-caste Hindu that exists. There are thousands, if not millions, among us who are really trying to understand the nature of changing the system. But the problem is when a system is so endemic and is so connected to the idea of faith and spirituality, it is not something that you change overnight. But this is precisely why we engage in a tradition of reform. There's this idea among all of the world's religions, especially among some of the most conservative and fringe and fundamentalist communities, that there's an infallible nature to everything that we do that comes to our faith, which means it has to remain unchanged, or else if it loses balance, it will get destroyed. And the fact of the matter is that faith and spirituality are some of the most malleable things that exist in the world, because God is so divine, God is so caring, God is so loving, that God cannot express his love in one single way, which means the divine creates that love and that compassion and that connection necessary to adapt to every community necessary, to every part of creation that is necessary. Which means if there is an expectation that love, that this divine connection is monolithic, that's nothing further from the truth. And we can look to a tradition that many of us may be familiar with, either in upbringing or in exposure, the Christian church. The Christian church does not have one sole denomination. The Christian church does not have one sole consensus on the understanding of the Trinity. But by creating all of these different denominations, one might argue that there is a lot of division. On the other hand, one might also argue that in seeing the different aspects of how the divine has become present through a Christ, that there are many diverse ways of understanding Christ the God and Christ the association with the Trinity. At the end of the day, what is the point of pushing for reforms in these hundreds, if not thousands of years of tradition? The point at the end of the day is to make sure that there is a relevance to a connection to something that is bigger than us. There's always a yearning among generations to see where there is purpose, to see where there is life, to see where there is love, to see where there is connection. Where do you find those things? You find them among the spaces that you are most familiar with, the people that are most familiar too. And one of those many ways today, as a present example, what I'm trying to say as a tradition of reform, is the space of the Revolution of Love ministry. The idea that you are engaging in a space that is set out to be different, that is set out to love everyone, that is set out to serve and fight for the justice of other people, is the very idea that we would wish we go back to many of our communities and traditions to inspire themselves to be the same way. And that inevitably is something that we are trying to aim for when doing the work of bringing our love to the public square. We do it with justice. We do it with solidarity. We do it unequivocally and unapologetically. And that is where we have to think about the ways that we engage. Now, we shouldn't be strangers to the fact that this week has been a major example of the normalcy of war, the normalcy of violence, the normalcy of, the political rancor of a deranged man who says he wants to do whatever he wants and he's going to get it whether he likes it or not, whether everyone else likes it or not. And you will note that in spaces where people are speaking up and fighting for Ukrainians who are now displaced, who are now having to travel hundreds of miles, who are now traveling to get themselves to safe places, while some are staying back to defend themselves and to defend their homeland, there's a lot of complexity around the realities of what we're looking at as a part of human history. When we look at the travesty of what's happening in Ukraine right now, it is no different in many ways to the suffering of the Palestinians, to the suffering of the Afghanis, to the suffering of the Yemenis, to many communities who at this very moment are still a part of that process of suffering. It's just that the camera has moved to a new place. What do you do in those situations? We don't want to displace the reality of what's happened in Ukraine with everything that's going on in the world. We are not trying to aim for whataboutism here. But we do have to acknowledge a reality that when communities of color have suffered historically, their suffering looks diminished in comparison to suffering that might happen in a place like Europe. News right now, news sources from major channels like CBS, like CNN and many others have actually had talking heads either as analysts or as reporters on the ground who have said, oh, look at the travesty of these blue-eyed, blonde-haired people who are suffering now. That is not normal. Or others who have said, oh, this is not Iraq or Afghanistan. This is not a third world country. This is Ukraine. How could we let this happen in Ukraine? And that kind of rhetoric is very, very problematic to the nature of how we're fighting for an inclusive intersectional justice for all people. You cannot dehumanize others just for the sake of trying to humanize and save others. That's not how this works. This is the nature of how if we're going to be very intentional about fighting injustice, that we do it across the board. We don't get to pick and choose who gets rights. We have to pick and choose who gets to serve future generations, and that should be all of us. There should not be a choice in who gets to thrive. And that is where we also get to see the beauty and the unfortunate nature of interfaith cooperation, a space that I've become so familiar with folks like Reverend Felicia and many others, because we get to kind of see a binary that exists sometimes. Reverend Felicia and I have been in way too many spaces where we know the beauty of interfaith work as being the work of justice, as being the work of showing up, as being the work of being arrested if necessary. But we also see the same interfaith work that is so passive, that is so obnoxious, that it actually begins to tear away at our hope in creating a space for interfaith cooperation. That the level of spiritual bypassing becomes so central and so normalized that we don't have an ounce of energy to offer to be able to be engaged in this work. At what point do you not call the bullshit for what it is? At what point do you stand at a point of neutrality and continue to see all suffering as the same suffering? Archbishop Tutu, the late and great from South Africa, made it very clear when he said, if you stand neutral in the side of oppression, you are complicit. Period. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about that. He even created a literal example of, if you see an elephant standing on the tail of a mouse and you say you are neutral, the mouse is not going to be very happy with you. At what points do we have to look at this and say that neutrality is the stance, that peace is neutral, that justice is neutral? It is not. It is abundantly contextual. It is abundantly restorative and transformative. There's no other way other than achieving a justice that people deserve. And that actually is an invitation to each of you when we think about this idea of living into a tradition of reform. When I'm challenging my own faith tradition, and when I am challenging the notions of interfaith cooperation and what that means, I invite each of you to think about where people are normalizing or standing neutral in the face of something that is wrong. And begin to ask the questions of, why is it so difficult to take a side on something that is very clearly wrong? Why is it so hard for each of us to not challenge a status quo of anything that is happening in this world right now? And those things don't even have to be national and international issues. It could be something that is happening in our own homes. It could be something that is happening in our own communities. Why do we not invite ourselves to take a stance when the stance is necessary? Why are we so fearful of the consequences of belonging, of the consequences of who rejects us and who accepts us, that we're not willing to stand up for justice? That justice doesn't remain justice if we don't choose a side sometimes. And if even we, and this is always an interesting thing for me, because I'm now sort of rambling because this has been a very frustrating week when dealing with all of this stuff. You have to remember that within many of the different traditions that exist in the world, in their understanding of the relationship of the divine, at no point does any divine entity mention that they stand neutral in the face of injustice. There is no point where that any scripture says something like that. When something wrong happens, one of two things happens. Either God shows up themselves and fixes the problem, or God sends an invitation to all of us that you need to do the right thing. There is no other compromise around that saying, oh, maybe we should consider being more amicable and non-political about this. Scriptures don't work that way, and God has never worked that way because God is kind of running the show. So when you are a part of this creation, when you have been blessed with the decision to do the right thing, act on it. I invite you to act on it. Because this idea of the revolution of love means that we don't sit back, we spring up and we run forward as we're able to. Each of us has the capacity, the power, and must have the willingness to be able to engage in a world that needs to be improved rather than one that we're kind of sinking down together. So that's kind of the reflection I bring to this space today.
Woo! Thank you. I didn't cut you off too soon there, right, Tahil? Was there any other? Okay. Everybody, let us show some love. Yes, thank you so very much. Powerful stuff. Please write in the chat different things that are coming up, bubbling up for you from what Tahil just shared with us, and also your questions. I have a few different things I want to ask him right now, but please, you can write your questions in the chat, and then we'll start looking at those. So Tahil, yes, I love it. I do have some different things that I would like to address. I was taking notes fastidiously here. I'm just going to see which one I want to start with. I want to go here first, and that is on the heels of this week. What gives you hope? How do you keep going?
A couple of key examples give me hope, actually. First is the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia who are saying enough is enough, who are standing in the face of a dictator and willing to say that your selfishness, your greed is not going to pass anymore, leading up to thousands of arrests and hundreds of people dying, that it becomes very clear that Putin even fears the power of the people, just does not want to admit it. Secondly, I have a lot of hope in those faith communities who are actually opening their doors right now for safe haven for people. Many communities within the Anglican Church in Europe to the Methodist Church to the United Church of Christ, even Sikh communities, and many other religious institutions have started opening their doors to accepting Ukrainians for safe haven. That is putting your money where your mouth is when practicing your theology in public. No exceptions there. And third, I would say is, I think one of the current leader of Ukraine, actually, who, for a lot of folks that we see as politicians nowadays, many of them don't have a backbone for the life of them. And somehow, for him coming from a background of being a satirist to then becoming the leader of a nation, to now becoming the leader of a nation that is being attacked, it takes a lot of guts to be able to stand up to someone in the face of all of this and to not leave your people behind, but to stand front and center instead. As being a nonviolent people, it is understandable that engaging in war is not only dangerous, it can be unethical, it can be unacceptable in many ways, but to still have the courage, both moral and deeply emotional, to be able to show up and still be with your people, rather than being the callous leaders who immediately escape the very chance that they get, means a lot in the face of all those Ukrainians who know that they may not have a future tomorrow, that they have someone that they can turn to among their own community who is willing to stand up, even if that stand up may look like something that leads to an imminent end.
It reminds me of when you just spoke, Tahil, saying the importance of not equivocating, not being neutral or normalizing. I mean, that's the ultimate right there, of not being neutral or normalizing any injustice.
Yeah, and that's living into an ethic of mutual accountability at the end of the day. How can you not strive for the justice of all people when that is the nature of how you prove mutual accountability? You don't just do that by helping those you're comfortable with, or those who look most like you, or those who speak your language, or those who come from your faith tradition. You do that for everyone, period. What you have to do is do it contextually, understanding where they come from, the nuances that they bring, and then determining what might be the best outcome and making sure that they get the support for equity and justice.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Thank you. Thank you for that response. There is a question from Dr. Robert Gross. Please put your questions, folks, in the chat. This one here says, do you think the media's immediate attention given to the Ukrainian situation, but ignoring many similar situations involving the oppression of non-white people, do you consider this an example of institutional racism at work?
Robert, thank you for the question. Absolutely. There's no question about it. They've made it very clear in their language, in just a couple of examples that I presented to you, that this idea of the broken normalcy of war in the Western world turns a blind eye to the very idea that we do not know a reality outside of peace, when the rest of the world does not know a reality outside of war and violence. And that is just despicable, quite honestly. Especially in the face of the very broken results of what was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, is a very clear example of the kind of attention that we pay to the plundering of a community, the plundering of a nation like Afghanistan, who now exists under the leadership of the very community that they feared from for decades. What kind of a justice did you prevail with when withdrawing? And what kind of a justice did you prevail with going in and staying there for almost 20 years? Yeah, of course, we don't want the same thing for Ukraine. We would never want that for any other nation, but for God's sake, at least fix the problem. Don't drop it like you did, and not only once in Afghanistan, but like 2-3 times.
Yep. Yes. Okay, we've got more questions coming in. We got more questions. What can we do for peace in Ukraine? That seems to be on many hearts and minds right now. Do you support peace rallies?
Gustavo, so good seeing you, and glad we've been in touch recently. Absolutely. I think rallies for peace send a very important message. Those that are safe, of course, we still have to be mindful of COVID and everything. That the message across the world should be that we stand with the people who are suffering right now. And very clearly, Ukraine is in a very deeply problematic place. They should know that there are people supporting them. But we always have to take it a step further. Because what we often do in movements for justice is that we assume that the march and the rally is enough. That we've done our part in history, and we can go away now. And this is where those people, especially those who are most privileged and can do so, should think about ways of being able to do more. If you can call your elected officials, locally, state, and federally, you should call them, you should email them, tell them that we need to take a stronger stance in making sure that Ukrainians are safe and they have a safe way to return without being attacked by Russia, without being attacked by the Putin administration. We also have to consider, if those of you have money that can be spent, to share it with organizations that are able to help provide very necessary resources right now. UNHCR, which is the UN High Commission for Refugees, UNICEF, there are Ukraine mutual aid funds and stuff like that where people can donate to at this time to make sure that people have what they need. Food, shelter, water, electricity, all of those things. Healthcare, first aid matters. We're still in the reality of COVID. This may lead to outbreaks. And people need to be prepared to be able to support those, to support their communities at the end of the day. So please keep that in mind. And try your best to actually educate yourself about the issue and the community that's being most inflicted right now. You know, Ukraine is not something that people can easily spot on a map. Go learn about it. Go see where it is. Learn about the communities, learn about their culture and history, learn about the implications of what happened with Chernobyl, because that is a very significant thing to pay attention to right now because the Putin regime has gotten a hold of it again. And we do not need history repeating itself when it comes to nuclear stuff, for sure. Please pay attention to these issues in a deeper way. We are interdependent for a reason, and that requires us to take a little step into the space of, I care about you enough that I want to learn about you and that I want to share a space with you so that I can be closer to you. I know one of the things that was mentioned in the earlier lines today is we don't care where you come from or who you are. I know that the message behind that is to be inclusive, but I actually always invite people to turn the table and say, actually, I want to know more about you, and that's why I want to care about who you are. And I know sometimes that message can be taken the same way, but the invitation to say, yes, where you're from, who you are, what you look like matters to me, because you're a beautiful part of this puzzle that we call life. And I want to know that you're that necessary piece that I need to have. So that's kind of what I'm kind of thinking about right now.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Tahil.
Thank you.
There is another question from Evie. And that is how do we defeat the violence and genocide without committing violence? I mean, this is kind of the age-old question when we're in nonviolent spaces, right? It's like, how do we do this? So if you want to touch in, I know we're at 6:52. We have about 3 minutes to unravel one of the biggest questions. But no pressure, Tahil, no pressure.
No. Evie, I appreciate your question immensely. Because trust me, if I had a way to answer this that quickly, I should probably get a Nobel Peace Prize. But that's not happening. So I think to answer this question, I think we need to what we need to do first is probably stop thinking of violence in its typical environment. A lot of what causes physical violence is rooted in many other kinds of violence: psychological, emotional, economic, social, identity-based. Those things are more rampant than ever before against many minority communities, against communities that have been historically marginalized and continue to be marginalized. Those are the roots of what lead to physical violence. If we can learn to diminish those other violences that are not as physical, we will see a reduction in physical violence. We have to be very intentional about our language to each other, our emotions with one another, legislation and policy, all of the things that make a society what it is. Do a better job at serving the society that it serves before that society attacks itself, which is what we're seeing time and time again. We have to be very mindful of the ways that, as much as we might be dealing with the rehabilitative nature of what might be happening in a crisis like Ukraine right now, or a crisis like Iraq or Afghanistan, or many other regions around the world, we also have to be preventative. We have to stop history from repeating itself, and we're not learning how to do that. We need to just stop being selfish and greedy, not try to take people's resources, not try to dehumanize other people, and get our shit together. That will ultimately, generationally, lead to some diminishing of that physical violence and genocide. But it is a long road ahead when you engage with it in nonviolence. And that's where we have to think of the incremental nature of justice versus the revolutionary nature of justice, which is at oftentimes, unfortunately, something that does become violent. We as people can try to prevent that violence by being the physical mitigators. But I don't always invite everyone to do that, because that is dangerous work. We know what it's like to stand in the middle of very dangerous situations, Felicia and I. And we know when people start attacking each other that it's not an easy thing for us to be able to prevent. It is possible, but it takes a different kind of energy. And we only want you to join this work in how you feel you can best bring yourself. Everyone has a role, but not everyone has the same role. So remember that you have something that you can do to prevent the violence and to be able to create a lasting culture of peace.
Tahil, I mean, I pray that everybody has heard what Tahil just said, because that is so important to lift up right now, that everybody's role it's there. There is some way that we can participate, and there is no excuse. There's no excuse. How that is going to look for David or Margaret or Evie or Manny or me or whatever, it can all look different, and that's okay. And so I appreciate you, Tahil, saying that. Also, just lifting up the fact too that one of the things that you made me think of is how people are at different levels of awareness. And so learning about violence and educating about the different kinds of violence, you're talking about psychological violence. Some people are literally just learning about that, and then others are maybe right on that precipice of jumping in a more active way. So all of this to say, friends here at Roll, that thank you, first of all, Tahil, for coming and giving us your time and your love and your and agitating. I hope that we do all feel some uncomfortability and take on some new things. Tahil, and I want to ask you one more quick thing. One action item that we can do. I know we already talked about some of them, but like, and that could be anything. That could be like a spiritual care step, or a community care step, or something else.
One thing that I would invite people to do is, as a part of, some of the breathing exercises that we did earlier in this call, I would say that as a part of some of those breathings, you should consider the idea of struggle and how important it is for us to fight against the struggle. So one thing that you want to repeat to yourself is that if I am worth the struggle, I will fight the struggle.
Would you,
and if you're,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, Felicia, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, would you lead us, in fact, lead us out with maybe some breathing and a prayer? Would that be comfortable for you?
Sure.
Okay.
So I will start by just doing 3 breaths, and keep this in mind. You don't have to say it out loud unless you'd like to. If I am worth the struggle, you breathe in, I will fight the struggle, and push it out. So let's do that together 3 times. One mantra I'm going to chant right now is from the Devi Suktam. It's actually a part of this idea of reforming tradition. In this, the goddess Durga, or we call her Adi Shakti, Lakshmi, Saraswati, she goes by many names, is referred to the one who is the root of all castes. And I actually have taken it upon myself to change the word that they use for caste to be the word that they use for revolution, that I repeat to myself sometimes. So I will chant that together. I will chant that with everyone here, and then we can be about our evening. Om Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Kranti Rupena Samstita Namastasye 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 Namo Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Mother Goddess, the one who has taken form of revolution, to you we offer our obeisance 3 times. May there be peace within us, between us, and all around us. May it be so.
May it be so. Thank you, everybody. Let's give Tahil some love once again. Thank you so very much. Thank you. This was a real delight. We have lots on our plates here in the sense of tools and opportunities and things that we can do. Yes. So thank you, Tahil, for highlighting so many different important insights for us. And we'll be back on in 2 weeks, everyone. And please take good care of yourself. Quick note about 2 weeks from now, we're calling it Healing Sunday, Art as Resistance. So if you have a song, and I'm seeking David's nodding his head right now. If there is a poem or whatever in like give you 3 to 5 minutes. Please bring it, because we want to hear from you. But it's under the lens, or in the lens of art as resistance. So let's do it. Let's be together and create. Okay, everyone, so feel free to come off of mute. Thank you again, Tahil Sharma, for being with us at the Revolution of Love. And thank you to all of you. Please be safe and reach out, do those Seva check-ins on one another if you need. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Nice to see
Hey,
you
everyone,
all.
take care. Good to
Thank
see
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tahil. That was sensational. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you,
so much.
Tahil.
Yes.
Yes,
Bye,
it was.
everybody.
Thank you, Tahil, and thank you,
Thank
Reverend
you, Tahil.
Felicia, and everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you, Gustavo. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Rev, Manny, everybody who helps
Mhm.
on. Thank you, Tahil. I really did learn a lot, and you answered my question very well, because I know I wasn't looking for the miracle answer. I was looking for where do we begin? What can we do?